My name is Sandra. I'm 19, a college student living in Seattle, and this is the story of how a simple inheritance turned my world upside down. When I was 13, my parents divorced. My mother, Linda, did her best to shield me, but the fracture in our family was hard to ignore. A few years later, my father passed away unexpectedly, leaving behind a $10 million inheritance. The catch? I couldn't access it until I turned 19. At the time, I had no idea how much turmoil that money would cause. By the time I started college, I was settling into a routine. I lived with my mom and stepfather, Ron, who had been in my life for 6 years. Our relationship was polite but distant, and beneath the surface, tension simmered. I hadn't expected him to play a pivotal role in what was about to unfold. One afternoon, Ron knocked on my door. His face was serious, almost grim. "Sandra, we need to talk," he said. I followed him to the living room, curiosity and unease creeping over me. Ron gestured for me to sit. "I know you've come into a substantial inheritance from your father," he began. "Jake, your stepbrother, is struggling to afford college. I think it would be best if you shared some of that money to help with his tuition." His words hit me like a cold splash of water. Jake, 2 years older and in his third year of college, had always kept his distance from me. The idea of giving him part of my inheritance, money I'd carefully planned for my own future, felt absurd. "I'm sorry, Ron," I replied, trying to keep my tone steady, "but I don't think that's fair. This inheritance is meant for my education and my future." Ron's expression hardened, his tone shifting from a plea to something far more forceful. "Sandra, this isn't just about you, it's about family. Helping Jake benefits all of us, and it's the right thing to do." "I disagree," I said, my voice firm. "I need to prioritize my own plans." What happened next sent a chill down my spine. Ron leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Don't be selfish," he said, a sharp edge in his tone. "This money was meant to help, and if you won't do the right thing, I'll have to step in." I froze. Was he threatening me? "I won't let you pressure me into this," I said, standing up. As I turned to leave, his final words stopped me cold. "Don't tell your mother about this conversation," he warned. "This stays between us." The weight of his threat lingered long after I left the room. Something wasn't right. Ron's urgency felt personal, and I couldn't shake the feeling that his motives went beyond helping Jake. That night, when the house was quiet, I decided to investigate. With trembling hands, I accessed Ron's computer, unsure of what I was looking for but determined to uncover the truth. As I combed through his emails, my suspicions solidified. I found messages between Ron and a woman named Carla, detailing plans to divorce my mother, but that wasn't the worst of it. The emails referenced a shady business deal involving money laundering, and possibly drugs. My chest tightened as I realized how deep Ron's deceit ran. The next morning, I couldn't sit on what I'd discovered. I needed proof, and I needed a plan. Pretending nothing was wrong, I approached Ron and Jake in the living room, my phone discreetly recording in my pocket. "Hey, can we talk?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. Ron eyed me suspiciously. "What's on your mind?" I took a deep breath. "I just want to understand why you're so insistent about this inheritance. What's really going on?" His patience snapped almost immediately. "Sandra, I've already explained. Jake needs help, and this money could make a real difference." Jake nodded along, his face blank. "Right," I said, feigning thoughtfulness. "I guess I just need to look into everything more carefully before deciding." Ron's irritation was palpable. "Sandra, you need to trust us. We're looking out for you." I bit back a retort and left the room, heart racing. The recording wasn't perfect, but it was a start. I was onto something bigger than I'd imagined, and the stakes were growing higher. When my mom left for a work trip a few days later, I knew it was the perfect chance to dig deeper. With Ron and Jake still in the house, I began searching for anything that could confirm what I'd found in the emails. I didn't know exactly what I'd uncover, or how far Ron was willing to go to protect his secrets. I spent countless hours poring over files from Ron's desk and digging through his computer. One evening, after the house had fallen silent, I returned to Ron's laptop, which he had carelessly left unattended. My heart pounded as I navigated through his emails and documents, searching for something concrete, anything to expose his true intentions. Finally, I struck gold. A thread of emails between Ron and Carla revealed cryptic references to cleaning up money and smoothing out operations. As I read further, their coded language became increasingly clear. They were laundering money, with potential ties to drug trafficking. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just greed, this was criminal. Shaking, I copied the emails onto a flash drive to ensure I had enough evidence. I took screenshots of related financial statements and other suspicious documents. It was a gamble, but I couldn't risk leaving a trace on his computer. Determined to learn more, I decided to follow Ron the next day. He had mentioned a business meeting, and I had a hunch it was anything but legitimate. Staying a safe distance behind, I trailed him through the city until he arrived at a dilapidated warehouse on the outskirts of Seattle. The place screamed secrecy and danger. I parked far enough away to stay hidden and watched as Ron entered the building, carrying a briefcase. Hours passed, each minute amplifying my anxiety. When Ron finally emerged, he looked visibly tense, scanning his surroundings before driving off. I made a mental note of the location and time, pieces of a puzzle I was slowly piecing together. Back home, I decided to confront Jake. I needed to know how much he knew about Ron's activities. "Jake, can we talk?" I asked, keeping my tone light. He shrugged, his face unreadable. "What about?" I took a deep breath. "The inheritance. Why is Ron so desperate for me to hand over part of it? What's really going on?" Jake's expression hardened. "You're imagining things, Sandra. It's about helping the family, like we've told you." "I'm not sure I believe that," I pressed, leaning in. "I found emails between Ron and Carla. Something's not right." His eyes darted away for a split second, a flicker of guilt crossing his face, but then he scoffed. "You don't know what you're talking about." I decided not to push further. His defensiveness spoke volumes. Jake might have been a pawn in Ron's schemes, but he clearly knew more than he let on. I realized confronting Ron directly would be useless. I needed backup. That night, I called my mother. "Mom, we need to talk. It's about Ron, and it's serious," I said, my voice trembling. "Sandra, I'm busy with work," she replied, clearly distracted. "Can't this wait?" "No," I insisted. "Please, Mom, this is urgent." Reluctantly, she agreed to hear me out. Later that evening, I laid everything bare: the emails, the financial records, the warehouse. "Mom, Ron and Carla are laundering money," I said. "They might even be involved in drug trafficking. I have proof." The line went quiet for a moment. "Sandra, are you sure?" "Yes," I said firmly. "I've sent you everything. You need to see it for yourself." The next few days felt like an eternity. My mother's silence gnawed at me, but when she finally called back, her voice was tight with resolve. "I've gone through the documents," she said, "and I've hired a private investigator. Sandra, you're right. Ron is hiding something huge." Relief flooded me, though it was quickly tempered by dread. "What do we do now?" I asked. "I'll be home soon," Linda replied. "We'll figure it out together." When my mom returned, she brought with her Kate, the private investigator, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who wasted no time diving into the evidence. She followed Ron's movements, investigating the warehouse and tracing the network tied to his schemes. The tension in the house became suffocating. Ron was growing suspicious, his questions about my activities becoming sharper. Jake, though still playing along with Ron, seemed increasingly uneasy. Kate's findings confirmed what we already suspected: Ron and Carla were laundering money and had connections to drug-related activities. Armed with undeniable proof, my mother and I decided it was time for a confrontation. That evening, we gathered in the living room. Ron and Jake sat across from us, their expressions wary. "Ron," Linda began, her voice steady but laced with anger, "we need to talk. Sandra and I know about your affair with Carla, and your illegal dealings." Ron's face went pale. "What are you talking about?" he snapped, though his voice wavered. Linda placed a folder of evidence on the coffee table. "This," she said, her tone icy. "Emails, financial records, photos of you at that warehouse. We know everything." Ron's eyes darted to the folder, then back to us. "You have no proof," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "We have more than enough," Linda replied coldly. "And Kate, the investigator I hired, has confirmed it all. If you don't come clean, we'll take this to the authorities." For a moment, Ron seemed at a loss, then his expression twisted into something dark. "You think you can just ruin me?" he hissed. "You have no idea what you're getting into." But I did, and this time, I wasn't afraid to fight back. "I have plenty of proof," I said, my voice firm despite the lump in my throat. "It's not just the documents, we know about the money laundering and the drug connections. You can't deny it." Jake, who had been silent, finally spoke up, his face pale. "Ron, is this true?" Ron's gaze snapped to Jake. sharp and menacing. "Stay out of this, Jake," he hissed, but the crack in his composure was obvious. The air in the room was charged, the silence between us taut like a wire about to snap. Ron glanced at the folder of evidence on the table, then back at me and Linda, his jaw tightening. "You think you can accuse me and get away with it?" he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You've been lying to us, manipulating us, and stealing from this family," Linda said, her tone steady and cold. "It ends now, Ron. You're not getting away with this." Something in Ron snapped, his expression twisted into pure fury as he surged to his feet, his eyes fixed on me. "You should have stayed out of this, Sandra," he growled, taking a menacing step forward. "I'll make sure you regret it." Before he could act, Kate, the private investigator, stepped forward from the shadows, her presence commanding. She held up her badge with calm authority. "Ron," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade, "we've got enough evidence to arrest you. I suggest you cooperate." Ron faltered, his bluster evaporating as the weight of the situation settled on him. He staggered back a step, his face pale. "This is a setup," he muttered weakly, but the conviction in his voice was gone. Linda, her eyes blazing with determination, leveled him with one last look. "You have two choices: turn yourself in, or we'll make sure the police do it for you. Either way, your lies are over." Ron's shoulders sagged in defeat, and without another word, he stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed through the house like the final toll of a bell. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Linda and I worked closely with the authorities, turning over the evidence Kate and I had gathered. The investigation quickly gained momentum, unraveling the full scope of Ron's schemes. The morning the police arrived to arrest Ron and Jake was surreal. I stood by the living room window, watching as officers approached the house. My heart raced as Ron was led away in handcuffs, his face a storm of anger and humiliation. Jake, following behind, looked shaken, his usual bravado gone. The media quickly picked up the story. Ron's facade as a respected community figure crumbled overnight, replaced by headlines about his illegal dealings, money laundering, and ties to drug trafficking. The fallout was swift and devastating. The courtroom proceedings were intense. Linda and I sat through every hearing, determined to see justice served. Ron tried to deflect blame, but the mountain of evidence against him left no room for doubt. Watching his empire of deceit collapse was both satisfying and sobering. Amid the chaos, Linda made the painful but necessary decision to file for divorce. It was a difficult process, but she approached it with the same strength that had carried her through everything else. The day the divorce was finalized, I saw a weight lift from her shoulders, a glimmer of hope returning to her eyes. Jake, though complicit in some of Ron's schemes, eventually accepted responsibility for his actions. His role was less significant than Ron's, and though his punishment was lighter, he would carry the consequences of his choices for years to come. In the months that followed, Linda and I focused on rebuilding our lives. The trauma of the past lingered, but we found solace in each other. Our shared struggle had forged a bond that couldn't be broken. We started small, long talks over coffee, laughing at old family stories, rediscovering the little joys that had been overshadowed by the chaos. Linda poured herself into her work, while I pursued projects I'd put on hold for far too long. Reflecting on the journey, I realized how crucial it had been to stand up for the truth, even when it felt overwhelming. The fight against Ron's manipulation wasn't just about the inheritance or the legal battle, it was about reclaiming our lives and our integrity. Over time, life found a new rhythm. The past would always be a part of us, but it no longer defined us. Linda and I emerged from the ordeal stronger, wiser, and more resilient. Together, we became a testament to the power of truth and the courage it takes to confront betrayal. The scars remained, but so did the lessons. Trust your instincts, fight for what's right, and never let fear silence you. As the seasons changed, so did we. Slowly but surely, we built a future rooted in strength, love, and the unshakable knowledge that we had faced the storm and survived.